And for more insight from what we just heard from the two leaders and the joint summit agreement, Professor Se-ryun of Kyung University and Unification Ministry correspondent Oh Jung-hee join us in the studio today. So good to see you guys again.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's start off with what we heard from the two leaders moments ago on their joint summit agreement, and they held a joint press conference together.
Right.
What were your thoughts on that?
Well, just to start with what was positive, because there is some positive, those points that they check off, the military, the threat alleviation, and cultural exchanges and all those are the things that have been promised or mentioned in Panmunjom Declaration. So they're doing their homeworks on checking off some of the details. But I think Dr. Bennett has kind of expressed all those skeptics' point of view and included myself, because this was a very important and very important juncture to make a breakthrough. Not the incremental changes and incremental improvement, but the breakthrough in the stalled talks, because what's hanging on that is whether there would be a U.S.-North Korea summit, which will talk about the lifting of sanctions and normalizing relations and all those good things that have been promised and that have been kind of speculated before. But my profound question at this point is whether President Trump, looking at and listening to this news, is moved by this development and say, well, I can claim the victory on this one and hang my coat on it and move forward. Even if he wants to, because we have seen that he will claim victory on where things are not really scant. But he has to measure it against the prospect of what's going to happen in the midterm election. He wants this so that this is a credible victory that can appeal to the voter base. But as Dr. Bennett says, and I agree, this is scant. This is not very concrete, where we were looking for really specific and very concrete results.
I mean,
no inspection.
It was more concrete compared to the one in April, but
One
still.
in April, the thing is, back then it was a declaration. What it was being said was, we're serious about denuclearization. Well, that same message was sent 11 years ago, and even before that too. So this declaration, if you were harsh about it, is tantamount to we're serious about denuclearization, really, honest, believe us. But as people would say, there's no action at this point. Even the facility dismantlement, which is a positive direction, right direction, but we don't know if those are the only facilities remaining. And that doesn't address the stockpiles of weapons that we don't know how many there are and where they are. And in order to address that, there has to be an element of inspection, comprehensive inspection. And that's the sticking point with the Iran deal, which U.S. pulled out anyway. So if those crucial elements are not addressed, probably the U.S. media and even the Donald Trump, as much as he wants to claim victory on this, probably will be very reticent about it.
It's not enough at this point,
Well, I just took a very quick look on the official document of the joint declaration between the two leaders, and what I noticed was the content about North Korea's denuclearization, or at least the denuclearization talks between North Korea and U.S., would be even less than 1/5 of the whole document. And the portion of it was very minor. And if we look at the document, it says, North Korea will take additional measures like permanently dismantling its Yongbyon nuclear facilities if the U.S. takes corresponding measures according to the June 12th summit. So this means that we aren't getting a 100% guarantee that North Korea is going to take additional measures regarding denuclearization. And also, there's no mention of the end of the war declaration. But, you know, this gives me a question, like question marks. I now have a question on whether is Washington's corresponding measures really declaring the end of the Korean War? Will that mean, will that, you know, push North Korea to take additional measures on denuclearization front. So this declaration rather leaves the ball in Washington's court.
Right.
I mean, that's what I think. And, you know, we have President Trump's midterms coming up in November, and with so many uncertainties seen in this document, will President Trump be willing to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un within this year? Well, we've heard from Dr. Bennett, we've heard from Professor Song. I have the same opinion. I think President Trump will find this not very much satisfactory in terms of holding another summit. But regardless of the North Korea and U.S. denuclearization talks, it seems that the two Koreas are opting to expand their interactions and exchanges. I mean, it seems like they want to now cover tourism or, you know, jointly holding Summer Olympics in 2032, and even like expanding cooperation in terms of health, medical care. So it seems South Korean President Moon aims to, you know, go on with inter-Korean relations separately from maybe North Korea-U.S. relations. But, you know, his end goal is, of course, to create a virtuous cycle between those two. And we definitely will have to keep our eyes on how all those go.
All right, then how would you see President Moon's role as a mediator this time around? How would you see that going?
It's a very important question, because his mediator role is a make or break situation as well, because there is a voice in especially the hawkish part of it, whether the President Trump, by meeting with Kim Jong-un, was spurred on by somewhat of an exaggeration on the part of President Moon, saying that Kim Jong-un is really serious about disarmament and the denuclearization. If that was the case, if things does not pan out the way that Donald Trump wanted, he could blame the President Moon, saying that he's a liberal president, sunshine, moonshine, all those things, and never produced anything, and still the same story. So in terms of U.S. relationship, this could be a kind of a testing ground as a mediator, and which is a shame, because the President Moon stepping in, making things happen, making talks happen, summits happen, that was a very refreshing, surprising, and also very positive development. So if it does not pan out, this is going to be a huge step backwards.
Right.
So he faces a very, very big task of when he meets with Donald Trump in
on the
later in
sidelines
the
of
month.
the UN General Assembly. Yes.
Right. Telling him that no matter what the express language is, there is a commitment, and there is something that probably something that we don't know yet. That could indicate that it's a venture worth taking or risk worth taking. Whether the President Trump will take another step, despite the skepticism abound, despite those hawkish oppositions, that's something that it's not easy to predict. I mean, only thing at this point to hang on is that he's unpredictable, so he might take a leap of faith, or he might take it into own step, but
you never know with
not
President
very
Trump.
positive.
Yes.
Right.
But I think at this point, what's concerning is that Kim Jong-un, once again, like Jung-hee said, handed the ball into the United States court. And the fact that the U.S. has been calling on Pyongyang to denuclearize first before we lift any sanctions, before we let you guys do anything. But then here in the agreement, it says if the U.S. follows through with its promise made in Singapore in June, then we will go ahead and do all these things that we promised. So it almost seems like that we're just back to, you know, number one again. Right.
That pushes the U.S. in an uncomfortable situation that they now really have to think about whether it is a lost cause. The worst situation, they could say, well, thanks, but no thanks, and not respond at all. And that will kind of stop the process in the midstream. I think that at this point, because of the domestic problems that Donald Trump was facing, he really wanted some big victory, some breakthroughs that will cover over his Mueller investigation and all those negative books that came out. So he needed a big weapon, but saying that, you know, handing up the ball in that way, it's a very weak volley.
I mean, he needs to garner support from the public, and to do that, he really needs to show a big achievement in terms of the denuclearization talks with North Korea. But there are two clauses regarding North Korea's denuclearization. First is dismantling the missile engine test site, which the moves of which have actually been observed since July.
Right.
But this could be a little bit of a development in that North Korea is willing to invite the experts over to North Korea, which is a big difference than what we saw in terms of Punggye nuclear test sites. But the other one, I'm talking about the if clause.
Right.
So, it says if the U.S. takes corresponding measures, then North Korea is willing to take additional measures like permanently dismantling the Yongbyon nuclear facility. So I think that one really raises skepticisms about North Korea.
All right, so depending on what President Trump is going to do with all this, because we know that in terms of inter-Korean relations, things are kind of getting along. It almost seems like you said, they're looking to restart tourism among Kumgang and Kaesong Industrial Complex and all that, but we don't know what the U.S. reaction is going to be like on this. And
Right.
like you said,
The presumption is that there were some newspaper articles, I saw it in the New York Times, that the intelligence report is that North Korea is still producing nuclear arms rather quietly. And they cite that that's what Pakistan did, and India did, and Israel did, and just be quiet about it. And the fact that Pakistan is not facing sanctions or any kind of big opposition to their nuclear program would persuade, even give courage to the North Korea to say that if we just bear down, hunker down, and bear it through, as long as we can trade with China, Russia, and a handful of countries that we can survive with, then there comes a point where they'll have to reluctantly acknowledge that North Korea is the nuclear power and there's nothing they can do to denuclearize this nation. So there are bad precedents that could give wrong ideas to Kim Jong-un, and if that's propelling his actions or small steps rather than the big steps, I think it's to me, I think is a miscalculation because it's not just taking a less favorable route, but it's a lost opportunity in a big way, because if he could make a big steps towards it, the sanctions lifted, and not only we're talking about the packages that come from the U.S., but South Korea, Russia, gas project, and the modern-day Silk Road, all those infrastructure constructions, that could have a lot of positive economic consequences, not only to North Korea, but in the region. So this big opportunity could be quashed if he doesn't really see the big long-term picture.
Well, if I could add one point before we go, I mean, one question really pops up in my mind, and that is, in this declaration, it says the two Koreas want to hold the opening of construction ceremony within this year in terms of connecting the roads and railways. But will that be possible? Because, there's really not much new measures, like groundbreaking measures in terms of North Korea's denuclearization, but at this point, the U.S. wants to keep the sanctions.
Maximum pressure.
Right, maximum pressure. So if that gets into the path, if that gets into the way of economic cooperation between the two Koreas, then will the two Koreas really be able to kickstart their constructions in terms of railway and roads connections? I think we'll have to see.
Right. Although infrastructure is an exception to the sanctions rule, but it's not just infrastructure. You got to build upon it, and probably you move into other substantive industries to go along with that infrastructure. Probably the sanctions will come in a bad way to block it.
All right, for now, I guess we'll have to see how things pan out from here on out, because the official summit between the two leaders is over, right? I mean, they have extra schedules laid out upon them, but for now, their meetings is wrapped up. So we'll see how this goes from here on out. Thank you so much for coming in today.
It was great to be
Thank you.
here.